Story 1. In the United Kingdom, it is illegal for politicians to wear armor in the Houses of Parliament. This dates back to 1313, after a period of political turmoil. The ban was introduced to discourage physical violence, as the nobles had a habit of issuing threats. Story 2. No handling salmon under suspicious circumstances. It is because of salmon poachers and smugglers. They would smuggle salmon into England through hidden coastal areas, often inside coastal caves. It was a form of tax evasion. The issue was that it was not illegal to get salmon out of a boat in a cave. So, they introduced the law of no handling salmon under suspicious circumstances. Story 3. It is illegal to put an ice cream cone in your back pocket in Georgia, Kentucky, and Alabama. This is because horse thieves would do exactly that as a way to lure horses out of the street into somewhere more secluded, where they could take control of the horse in peace. Story 4. It is illegal to fish while riding a camel in a river in Boise, Idaho. Yes, that's because it is illegal to fish while riding any animal in the river. The law never mentions camels or giraffes, but that is the animal always mentioned in the dumb law web pages. The law was specifically intended to prevent people from using a horse to walk up and down the stream, which would destroy habitat and kill fish eggs. Story 5. Milkmen are not allowed to run. Why are we stopping them from running, you ask? Back when the law was written, milk runs were done with glass bottles. One false move and not only have you lost the milk, but the milkmen were covered in shards. Story 6. In the city I live in, it is illegal to drive a car in the city limits without someone walking in front of it swinging a lantern. This is because the first car driven into the city ran over a pedestrian who didn't see it and killed him. This is still on the books, but obviously not enforced. Story 7. This is a slightly dark topic, but a Turkish friend of mine who is a lawyer recently told me that until some years back, by Turkish law, if a woman was raped but then married her rapist, the rape was retroactively considered not to be rape. This obviously sounds horrific, and it was, but the reason for it was to prevent honor killings. In the eastern parts of Turkey, which are often quite backward, a woman's family would kill her if she were raped, because of medieval-minded bigotry to essentially save face. The authorities cannot prevent this in any meaningful sense through law enforcement, so this law was enacted to save the lives of the rape victims, even if it did come at a terrible cost. Story 8. Gun laws regarding stocks, length, barrel length, and forward grips are confusing and do not make any sense. Why? Tommy guns. The original law was targeting Tommy guns. Story 9. It's illegal to marry bottles in a bar or restaurant. Marrying means taking two half-full bottles of the same liquor and combining them into one bottle. It's to prevent dishonest bar owners from taking poor-quality liquor and putting it in nice bottles, selling it at a high price as the nice liquor. Story 10. You cannot collect rainwater in Oregon. Except you can. The real case was a guy diverting a stream to stock his private lake. All water in Oregon is considered to belong to the public. You can get permits for water rights, but this guy wanted to bypass that. And yet it shows up on dumb law sites all the time. By the way, roof rainwater collection doesn't require a permit. It really was just a guy being super greedy. Story 11. This is kind of the opposite, which shows how a law for one thing was used for another. The town would not allow basketball hoops in the front yard. It was a very upscale town, and people thought it made the neighborhood less desirable. There was an ordinance about not having a post to tie your horse up in the front yard, which is the regulation they used to block it. Story 12. Bees are classified as fish in the state of California. It was done to provide immediate tools to save the bee population while they work on actual legislation that specifically addresses bees. Story 13. I remember something going around where someone said they didn't understand how committing suicide could be illegal. How could you get punished for that? But it's so the police can enter your home to try to prevent it without repercussions. Story 14. In New York, it is illegal to make small talk in an elevator. This is because elevators used to require an operator who had to concentrate on what they were doing. Story 15. Adverse possession, also known as squatters' rights. If you occupy land that isn't yours openly and notoriously, it's yours after a certain period. The idea is that you'll improve it, unlike the actual owner who pays so little attention to it that he doesn't even know there's someone squatting on it. Story 16. It's customary for many to leave their car doors unlocked in Churchill, Manitoba. This is because polar bears can wander into town and people may need to seek shelter in a vehicle. Story 17. I saw one on a stupid laws sort of website that stated in Florida, doors cannot open inward for dwellings of more than 50 people. I would encourage anyone who somehow thinks this law is stupid to look up the Iroquois Theater fire of 1903. Locked doors, confusing doors, blocked exit signs, and yes, inward opening doors caused the deaths of over 600 people. Story 18. In the United States, it is illegal to own a native bird species or possess any part of the bird or its eggs, or to disturb the nest of one. So if you're walking through the local park and find a pretty feather, don't pick it up. You could get arrested. This is because of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, and it is still enforced to this day. It sounds kind of odd, but there were too many bird species that were on the brink of extinction because people were overhunting them. For example, great egrets have beautiful long white feathers. They were killed so that the feathers could adorn ladies' hats. At one point, they were almost endangered, but fortunately, they are now very common in certain habitats. There are many other examples, but this is a significant one. Someone I know found a deceased red-tailed hawk on the side of the road and took some of the tail feathers to make a decoration for the rear window of her car. She was actually arrested, but they ended up dropping the charges. Unfortunately, it was too late for the passenger pigeon. Story 19. Laws against vagrancy, including loitering, seem pretty strange because you can't just exist in public without a purpose. You can't just stand somewhere and talk for a while. There was a huge surge in these laws in 1866. The American Civil War ended in 1865, and the 13th Amendment said slavery was still legal if convicted of a crime. Story 20. In ancient Rome, there was a law that made it illegal for women to cry at funerals. People hired professional mourners at funerals to give the impression that the deceased was well loved. The professional mourners would exaggerate and wail while crying. This law was made to discourage the practice of fake mourners. Story 21. In Chicago, it was once illegal to give a dog whiskey. This law from the 1800s came about because bar owners would get dogs drunk on whiskey and charge people to watch them stumble around for entertainment. The practice became so common that animal rights activists pushed for the law to protect dogs from being used as drunk circus acts in taverns. Sounds silly now, but it was one of America's earliest animal cruelty laws. Story 22. Washington State Law Revised Code of Washington 46.52.010 is trying to prevent hit and runs involving parked cars. But I don't know why they worded it this way. One word makes a big difference. Or shall leave in a conspicuous place in the vehicle struck a written notice, giving the name and address of the operator. My understanding is leaving the note on the vehicle is not sufficient, based on this language. You have to leave a note in the vehicle if you can't locate the owner. My driver's education instructor giggled as he explained this to my driving class about 15 years ago. They still haven't changed to fix it. Story 23. It is illegal to pump your own gas in New Jersey. The reason is that having a paid professional do it instead of the amateur vehicle owner would cost less to insure the gas station. With cheaper insurance, overall prices are lower than what it would cost to insure vehicle owners pumping. Story 24. In Vermont, it is illegal to whistle underwater. This law was created in the 1930s because professional pearl divers were using coded whistle signals to secretly communicate the location of valuable freshwater pearls to their partners, essentially stealing from their employers and depleting pearl beds before they could be properly harvested. The law sounds ridiculous today, but it was actually an early attempt to protect both the nascent pearl industry and prevent theft through underwater communication systems. Story 25. In Arkansas, it is illegal to keep alligators in bathtubs, but it is not illegal to bathe an alligator in a bathtub. If a law enforcement officer found an alligator in your bathtub, you would be arrested for possessing the animal, not bathing it. Story 26. Perfect sense doesn't mean you agree with it, just that you understand why it was written the way it was. The United States Constitution says that direct taxes by the federal government must be apportioned to the states based on population. Pretty strange, right? Why can the federal government make a tax on a transaction between people such as an income tax, but if it tries to directly tax property that people own, then the total direct tax paid by the population of a state has to end up being proportional to the population of the state? Well, it's racist, that's why. The rich Southern aristocracy was worried that Congress would put a tax on slaves or a tax on land to attack the aristocrats, so they put that clause in during the drafting of the Constitution to make sure that populous northern states with no slaves would end up paying a bunch of cash if a tax on slavery was ever introduced. We can understand what they were trying to do and understand their motivations and completely disagree with them. Story 27. Europeans insult Americans all the time because Kinder eggs aren't legal here. Stupid Americans will choke to death unless the government stops it. The actual law that prevents the original eggs from being sold here predates the product. 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. 1974 Kinder Surprise. The law, summarized and in part, says that nothing inedible may be fully contained inside something edible, which is entirely reasonable. Story 28. In some, most likely many United States states, and I'm assuming many other countries, it is illegal to serve alcohol to a visibly intoxicated person, including in a bar or nightclub. Seems pretty silly, right? Isn't that the reason that bars exist in the first place? Well, the law is obviously not enforced very strictly, but it exists so a bartender or server can cut anybody off for any reason, no questions asked. If somebody is getting pleasantly drunk and not bothering anybody, the alcohol will probably keep flowing for them. But if someone is getting handsy, belligerent, or is starting to look seriously unwell, the law allows the bartender to cut them off and send them home. If the patron won't take the hint, it allows them to get the police involved. Story 29. Corporate personhood sounds ridiculous to a lot of people, especially the average Reddit user, but it's what enables an individual to make deals with or sue groups of people simultaneously instead of having to write separate contracts for or serve papers to each member of that corporation. Story 30. Not a law, but if a large building is on fire, unless you are in the immediate vicinity of the fire, the advice is usually to stay put. Do not evacuate. Modern buildings are constructed with fire walls and doors, meaning that even if a fire is raging in a specific wing or floor, it's incredibly difficult for it to spread to another area. If the entire building attempts to evacuate, even those who are nowhere near the fire, this creates two serious problems. First, anytime you get a large group of people in a small area, such as an emergency stairwell, you risk a crowd crush, which is a very serious and deadly emergency. Second, emergency personnel cannot make their way up the stairs if hundreds of people are making their way down. Of course, this only works if the building is designed to naturally contain the fire to one space. Otherwise, you get situations like Grenfell. Story 31. Not an unusual law, but Washington state had no laws criminalizing bestiality until after the Enumclaw horse sex case, where a man died after being injured by a horse. Story 32. Several states have laws against the sale of firearms that can melt at 800 degrees Fahrenheit. This is to prevent the sale of so-called Saturday night special handguns that primarily use zinc alloys for major components. Story 33. I heard about this county down south that banned dancing, which seemed crazy to me. But I guess one time some kids had a big party and danced, and there was drinking as well. A bunch of them got in a car and all ended up getting killed. So they banned dancing. I think there is a documentary film about it. Story 34. Contrary to popular belief, it is not against the law to die on Svalbard. It is illegal to get buried there, though. The reason being, as was found out, certain diseases like the Spanish flu can become dormant in the extreme cold. Story 35. In the local area next to mine, they made you get a license to work on your car at home if you exceed a certain number of cars at the property. This is a suburban area. They did it because cars filled with oil and lubricant were rotting on people's property, leaking into the ground. Cars were left on the streets and front yards, drip, drip, dripping. Story 36. It is illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket. The context is that horse thieves would steal a horse because it just followed me home. The horse was just trying to eat the ice cream. Story 37. You cannot drink alcohol in public places past 10:30 p.m. What happened was that some people were drunk, and when traveling back to their homes, they got into a slight argument with their transportation provider. The details became unclear, But ultimately, one of the drunk individuals was run over by the transportation with which they had the argument. A riot shortly started, causing some damage to the surrounding areas, much panic, more destruction of property, and some injuries. As of now, the area where the riot occurred has been designated as a no alcohol consumption or selling zone on the weekends and public holidays, as well as being heavily policed. Additionally, a law was passed prohibiting the consumption or purchase of alcohol past 10:30 p.m. in most stores and public areas. Story 38. Suicide is illegal. This is so that police can try to stop you from doing it. Sleeping it off in your car instead of drunk driving is recommended. This is because even if you have good intentions, a lot of people will wake up 1 to 2 hours later and feel extremely uncomfortable trying to sleep in the car, and will end up driving home anyway.